that time of year. It's fall. It's a tad chilly out here. The girls, for the most part, are getting ready for winter. There's just not a lot of activity going on right now, but there's not a lot of feed out here. So I want to talk about winterizing your hives, and there's multiple different ways to do it. Lots of techniques out there. I've tried quite a few of them over the years. I've had some success, I've had some failures. And I would like to go through several different types of insulation, talk about their pros and their cons, and let you decide what's best for you, because you are really the one that is going to have to decide what's best for where you're at. I'm in Southern Illinois. I shouldn't say Southern Illinois, I'm in Southwest Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, so it gives you a parallel. And our winters have been pretty mild, the last few, but we'll get some cold stretches. We'll get down into the zeros, and that can be for an extended period of time. And in those cold stretches, I like to be able to make sure that my bees have the proper insulation to allow them to thrive throughout winter. Where you're at may be much colder, where you're at might be much warmer. You may or may not need everything that we talk about. But again, I just want to educate you on that and make sure that you've got the tools that you need. Mad Dog is hunting. Second thing I want to talk about, and I'm not trying to insult anybody here, but there's a mindset, and I hear it a lot, of, oh, I need to keep my babies warm. I need to keep them happy and dry. And I think the minute that you start applying human emotions to bees, which are a bug, they're an insect, then we start to get away from what's really important to remember about bees. Bees can survive in the wild just fine. In fact, they've been doing it for a long, long time, much longer than when we decided to try to keep them in a square box. They've been surviving winters in hollow trees and cavities for a long time. This whole idea, not idea, but is supported by Dr. Thomas Seeley. He is one of the world's leading researchers on bees. And in his book, The Lives of Bees, he explains how wild bees have survived in tree cavities for millennia. And that book is incredible. If you don't have it in your library, you need to. In fact, just about everything that Dr. Seeley has written is educational, well written, and I've had the chance to meet him. He's just a really nice guy. So we're going to move upstairs into the shop where it's a little bit warmer, and I want to go through some of the techniques that we've got that are available out there. I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm sure there's lots out there that we're not going to talk about, but I've got 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever, and then at the end I want to talk about how I have found my bees survive the best. And I think it works in a lot of different climates. So let's head up to the house where it's a little bit warmer. So let's discuss the ways, but before we do that, I want to talk very quickly about the fact that you're going to have to attach it somehow to the box or boxes. Just an aside, I'm going to show everything on a single deep and not a double deep. Reason being is because a double deep all of a sudden will appear and it's just not going to work. And all you have to do, I'm going to show you everything. It's just cut for a single deep, because most of my hives are single deeps. Cut it twice as big, not brain surgery. I think you can figure that out. But you've got to attach them. How do you do that? One way is tape. I like painter's tape because it doesn't really destroy my equipment and it works pretty well. Another way is duct tape, and this is Gorilla Tape, and it's meant to be permanent. So if you use it on your equipment, you probably don't plan on taking it off for the rest of the year. That's what that does. Now here's what I am a big fan of: bungee cords. And here's the beauty of bungee cords is I make bungee cords that fit my hives. So I only circle once and they're in permanent, and I can easily take my insulation off. Bungee cords are super crazy simple to make. There's a crimp. You can buy a crimping tool. They're cheap. They're really cheap. And you can buy crimps, and crimps are really easy to use. So that's one way to do it. Don't want to go to the expense? Do what I do here. Just tie off the end. It's really super, super simple. The beauty of this, again, is that one size fits. I, for years, was taking various lengths of bungee cord and trying to make them fit. Don't do that. This stuff is really pretty inexpensive, but you're going to love the fact that you've got it for putting your insulation on and taking your insulation off. I will put links down below to all of these items if you're interested in them. They are affiliate links, but I appreciate it. Helps us support what we do here in this channel and what we like to continue to keep doing. So let's get on with the very first technique, and that's black tar paper. So black tar paper, super simple because it's really cheap, it's pretty easy to work with, and it will provide insulation. And it goes on fairly simple. You simply wrap it around. I highly suggest crimping the edges in advance so that you get a good tight fit. Overlap at the back. And if you caught my drift a second ago, use bungees, because now my tar paper is on. If you feel more comfortable, slap a second bungee on. Because once you start making bungees, you can't stop. It's like a drug. You just have to make bungees for everything. Okay, enough of that. So black tar paper works great, but here's the important thing you need to remember. Black tar paper will be a good windbreak. It will help stop wind from coming into the hive. It has very little insulation value. I mean very little, like 1 or 0. The study talked about it and said it basically provides 0 insulation for the hive. But what it does do is during the day, it will collect more heat and put more heat inside the hive, but it doesn't keep it inside the hive. So that's the one flaw. But on the other hand, if you're in a climate that maybe is a little bit warmer, this might be a good option for you. It's simple, it's easy to use, and it doesn't cost a whole lot. But then there's a second step if you want to, and this is what I did for years, insulation with it. So let me show you how I did that. So foil insulation really is a good way to go because it does provide you windbreak again, and it also provides a little bit more insulation. Not a lot. I mean, we're talking maybe an R2, somewhere in that neighborhood. So all you're doing is maybe raising your outside to an R3 or so. And I haven't mentioned this before, a hive itself will run somewhere around an R1 or an R2. The wood on it is not a real good insulator. But the way I like to apply this is the same way as foil insulation, but I actually really like to pair it with foil insulation because then it gives me kind of a double benefit, double bonus. And so, again, I just wrap them around, bring everything tight, grab my bungee, and it's on. It's that simple. So you're still going to get the heat from the black tar paper. It's going to transfer more to the inside of the hive. It's going to transfer to the foil paper, and then the foil insulation paper is going to keep it on the inside a little bit. First saw this, University of Guelph, Paul Kelly, who I think is really an expert in the field of entomology, and especially with bees. I'll be talking quite a bit about him as we continue on here. But if you haven't studied his work a little bit, go out to his YouTube channel, University of Guelph, and there's amazing things to learn from Paul Kelly. I learned an awful lot. That's foil insulation. That's actually what I used for probably my first 5 years of beekeeping. I had really good results with it, but I'm in a little bit milder climate. So this gave me a little bit more insulation, and I've had success with it. And now my absolute real go-to now, and that is rigid foam insulation. Rigid foam insulation, I feel, gives me the very best all around because it gives me a windbreak, but it also does a great job insulating. And what it does is I'm using this foam insulation, which when I apply it to my hive, I am able to provide an R6 insulation on the inside of this hive. And an R6 insulation is pretty similar to what you're going to get in a tree cavity. Some will be more, some will be less, but on average they're found that that's about where it's at. Also, Dr. Samuel Ramsey, who is an entomologist who specializes in honeybees, did research on rigid foam insulation. What he found is that versus the black tar paper or some lesser insulations, or just leaving as is, it allows less fluctuation in temperature inside the hive, which makes it easier on the bees, so they're not adjusting very quickly to temperature changes. It also makes it easier on them to maintain the temperature inside the hive. So I go with rigid foam insulation. It is easy to cut. I've got a video that I did earlier this year that talked about how to cut this, shows how to cut this, and you can check that out up here. Take a look at that. I'm not going to go through how I do it here, just to say that I tape everything together, and as you can see how easy it was to put on. And if I need to take it off, and I'm big on FLIR cameras, and we're going to talk about that in another video, how I use an infrared camera to determine the health of my hives throughout the winter and how things are going. And in order to do that, I have to take insulation off. So when I'm out in the field, undo the bungee cord, and the insulation slides right off. It couldn't be any simpler. So we've talked about the sides. Those are 3 of the most common things to do in the sides. In a colder climate, this works great. Even in a warmer climate, just to avoid fluctuations in temperatures, because you can get some cold snaps. So those are the 3 ways that I've used, and now I want to talk about how I combine that with what's on top. It's what's on top that really counts. So before I go any further with winterization of your hives, I need to talk about moisture. There's 2 basic theories of moisture out there, and the number one that everybody says is that you must keep moisture out of your hives, and that moisture will kill bees. Well, moisture not controlled the right way will kill bees. Moisture controlled the right way will make your bees much, much happier. The basic way people have kept bees for years is that they insulate the hives and they ventilate the tops, because they don't want moisture to condense on the inside of the hive and rain down on the bees. Well, that's one way to do it. But the other theory behind that I've found is that if you are really ventilating the heck out of your hives, that's like in your house, having all your upstairs windows open, and your furnace has to work like crazy to keep the house warm. What's the furnace inside of a beehive in the winter? It's the bees. So if the bees have to work harder to keep it warm, then maybe we need to take another look at that. That's where the whole theory of condensing hives comes into play. Condensing hives basically says that you seal your hive tight. No air leaks whatsoever. Tape things off. Make sure that air cannot get into or out of the hive. You place lots of insulation on top of your hive. I mean lots, and I'm going to show you what lots looks like. And by placing a lot of insulation on top of your hive, you create a barrier that allows the inside of the hive, and especially the roof of their hive, to be above the dew point. When warm air hits a surface that is below the dew point, it causes dew, which in a hive that is cold, that is going to rain down on bees and cause the moisture issues. In a hive where the roof is above the dew point, then that warm air does not condense. That warm air stays in the hive and it circles to the outside, and when it does go down to the bottom, it hits a point where the dew point of the wood on the inside is below, and what that means is it condenses. So how are you dealing with moisture at that point? The way you're dealing with moisture is that you are allowing the bees then to use that moisture that is condensed on the inside of the hive when they break cluster to be able to go down and get moisture. They can get liquid. They need water as much in the winter as they need it in the summer. And that provides them the opportunity to have it. Not only for hydration, but honey gets a little thicker in the winter. As we all know, if we have cold honey, it doesn't flow very fast. This also helps provide water for the bees to be able to thin the honey out so they're not working so hard at eating it. That is the most basic of theories of it. There's so much out there. Dr. Paul Kelly, University of Guelph, has unbelievable amounts of information. Etienne Tardoff from the Yukon has done unbelievable amounts of studies on it and talks about moisture and bees in the winter. I highly encourage you, if you are interested, to learn more. I can't go into it in a short video. But here's the other thing that it does. By creating a condensing hive, you also tighten everything up, and inside the hive, the bees create unbelievable levels of CO2. Levels of CO2 that would kill you and I if we were stuck in a room. For the bees, it drops their metabolic rate. When you drop the metabolic rate, they require less food. So inside a condensing hive, CO2 levels go up, they require less food. Less food means they have to burn less energy to stay warm. If you're burning less energy to stay warm, you don't need as much food. Again, Etienne Tardoff did a great article on CO2 in the October American Bee Journal. I would highly recommend, again, reading that. It is an eye-opener about how important CO2 levels actually are inside of a hive. So that's the basics of a condensing hive. I'm going to show you how to put insulation on top of your hives. I'll talk a little bit if you are wanting to vent. We'll show you how to ventilate, and if not, I'll show you the way that I do it, and I've had success. So okay, let's start working on the top. So my first line of defense in the late fall, early winter, let's talk real quick about that. When do I insulate? I usually insulate when temperatures outside are consistently in the lower 50s and you're getting down in the 30s at night. So around here, probably the beginning of November is when I'm starting to, or if I haven't already because the weather's turned, put my insulation on. It doesn't hurt if you put it on a little bit early, but it does hurt if you put it on too late. So what's my first line? It's a quilt box. A quilt box is basically a box that on the bottom has a screen, and underneath that screen, or above that screen, is some muslin insulation. I build all my own quilt boxes. I'm going to be doing another video in a week or two that talks about quilt boxes and how to build them. So I'll go further into the theories on that, but without getting too far into it, you build the quilt box, put the quilt box on top, and you pack it with, I use basically hamster bedding or bedding that I get from a local pet store. And then I pack it in. I mean, pack it in. What this does is provide that first line of insulation and keeps things moving, but then it also provides a little bit of a guarantee that if things start to go a little bit awry in a hive, that between the muslin underneath it and the wood chips up top, that if moisture does become an issue or the top of the hive does get below the dew point, that I'm still not getting that condensation. But this system will also still allow that air to flow through because it's a pretty tightly packed system. So what's interesting about this is in the middle of winter, I can go and take the top off and dig through this, which I often do, to make sure that there's no moisture down in the middle front of this. And that just tells me that things are going the way they are. I can, though, dig a little bit on the sides and I'll feel a little bit of moisture on the edges, which just tells me it's where it's cooler and that's where it's picking up a little bit of moisture, where the quilt boxes are doing their job. So that's my first line of insulation for keeping the inside of the hives warm. So something I want to add is that on this particular quilt box, I built this quilt box quite a few, 2020, and in 2020 I was not doing condensing hives. I was insulating. So there's a screen in here and there's 4 holes. What that meant was that the air would rise and then it would be sucked out of these holes. But again, that's like leaving my windows open. So I don't do that anymore. I basically have taped these tightly closed so that I'm not getting air leak through them, and this is just a solid system. But as I said before, if you want to ventilate your hives, and again, I'll show you when I do the video here in a week or two about quilt boxes, you can then put the holes in the side of the hive and put in ventilation, and that will provide you enough of a flow to keep from water condensing and raining down on the bees. So things are getting pretty tall here, so I tell you what I'm gonna do. We're gonna move the quilt box to the side. Let's move the whole hive to the side here for a second. So quilt box, super goes on top. Insulation fits very, very, very tightly to the inside. You want it to fit tight. you don't want there to be air gaps. So tight insulation on the inside. I push it down against the quilt box. I take another piece, I put it on top. I take a third piece and I put it on top. Now I have all the insulation I want on top of a hive to keep the dew point of the top of that hive above the point where it will create moisture. This system has worked great for me and I will continue to use it. So what do I put on top of this? Quite simple. I actually put an inner cover on it. It gives me a little bit more and it also just keeps things out. And then I just put my telescoping cover on the top of it. And that's the system that I use until January. And in January, then we start to put on candy boards. So candy boards, this is an empty candy board, okay? A candy board goes on top of the hive, okay? It goes directly above the bees because this candy board is going to be filled with sugar, okay? I'm not going to get into the whole ways of doing it. There are multiple different ways. I'm going to do a video in a couple of weeks about how I do candy boards. I said I put them on in January, usually late December, January. That's for me because where I'm at, that's at about the time that I want the bees to start eating the sugar. And I also put a small pollen patty in there and it starts to stimulate the development of brood with the queen. So the candy board then goes on. Again, I make them tight, and I'll show you how I make candy boards and how I make the candy in a couple weeks. And it goes on top. And again, things start to get pretty tall here. Okay, but that is then my configuration for the winter. But I will add, I take additional insulation and place it around the hive, bungee that on, and I keep going until the entire hive is covered. I have lots and lots of this R6. Again, it just gives me everything I need to keep the hive sealed off, and it just provides a little bit more insulation so that the bees don't have to work as hard to maintain the heat in the inside, and it just helps make everything work for the bees, just like they would in nature as they have for millions of years. So that's it. That's an explanation of the different types. No, I didn't get into how do you make all those things, how do you do those things. It's way too much for right now. I just hope you'll understand that insulating your hive can be a great thing. Multiple ways to do it. Hopefully you've learned some things to help bees do what bees do in the winter and what they have done for millions of years, and survive and thrive. And that's the key. We want our bees to thrive and survive, and we need to give them the tools in which to do that with. Again, I hope you learned something. Please subscribe if you've not. Really appreciate that. Hit that like button. Any questions, comments, please leave them in the comment section and we'll get to you. Again, promise, I'm gonna get back to you over the next couple of weeks with details on candy boards and quilt boxes. Stay tuned. Thanks.